Marvel's Snap's latest season pass carding Gilgamesh is here, a 5/7 with the on reveal of getting larger for each other card you have in play with increased power. This means while his theoretical floor is simply a 5/7, the theoretical ceiling is as large as a 5/18 if you play him out onto a board where you have 11 other cards that have increased stats. While this may seem like a little bit of a pipe dream, what seems to be Gilgamesh's early likely best home, i.e., blue Marvel decks, actually get him to his cap or relatively close to it with some consistency. You simply need to have a copy of blue Marvel in play and then have a full board, and then Gilgamesh pumps himself up to 17 points worth of power and then tops off with an 18th thanks to blue Marvel buffing him as well. My initial read on Gilgamesh is that he seems like a fairly solid B or maybe B minus addition to Marvel Snap in terms of generic power level against a variety of decks in the format. He is putting out a meaningful amount of stats that can definitely help you win plenty of games. However, similar to a lot of other archetypes that are held in the B or C tier, such as Bounce, his stat line in general, even under the best case circumstances, seems to fall a little bit short of going toe to toe with the absolute biggest decks in the format, i.e., things like Hela or Living Tribunal that just put absolutely massive numbers into play. Overall, my initial read on Gilgamesh is that I don't really expect him to be a format defining must have card that you need to be competitive, but all the same, I think there's a number of deck lists where he's likely to be best in slot, and we're going to go ahead and spend the rest of this video going over some of the early contenders of things that seem very reasonable places for our latest card release. Our first Gilgamesh deck is a Kazoo core that I would be incredibly surprised if it doesn't end up being one of his optimal slash ideal homes. I think this shell was quite good even before Gilgamesh was added to the game, and he's felt like a solid improvement to it. Essentially, this deck list is phenomenal at going wide and filling up the board in its entirety, thanks to cards like Squirrel Girl and Debris. And then with Blue Marvel and even Khazar, Gilgamesh regularly hits 14 to 18 points of power when you play him out on that last turn of the game. This deck list also really likes playing a 5-drop on its last turn, often pairing it with a 1 energy card like Squirrel Girl or Ant-Man, or even having a really discounted Mockingbird thanks to all of the generated cards that this deck puts into play. As far as high series substitutions go for this deck list, Mockingbird and even Gilgamesh I think can be swapped out for things like Cull-Obsidian and Crossbones to give you big stat lines when they're needed. Nocturne should definitely be a card that lets you interact with the location Limbo, so that way you can keep up against decks that are going bigger. Things like Scarlet Witch or Snow Guard fill into that role well, and that leaves us with White Widow, who would be another good proactive 2 energy card. You can even substitute her for something like Medusa, which has direct synergy with Gilgamesh. Our next Gilgamesh take is a little Patriot deck that I've really enjoyed in the past. It feels like a good organic home for him, or a blue Marvel deck at the core that goes wide across the board, going to regularly get Gilgamesh quite large. And then as opposed to playing Khazar as our secondary buffer, we have Patriot to pair with Squirrel Girl Squirrels, Hood's Demon, and Mysterio. One especially noteworthy interaction between Patriot, Mysterio, and Gilgamesh in this deck is that Patriot technically buffs the real Mysterio on the board until it reveals at the end of the game, meaning even if you have just Mysterio and Patriot in play, Gilgamesh is going to get +3. This deck list also has a variety of other cards that organically get bonus power to work with Gilgamesh as well. Carnage, Dazzler, Medusa, Ant-Man, and even Nico's +2 or her 2x mode are all fantastic ways to make Gilgamesh's power grow. As far as possible Series 4 or 5 substitutions go for this deck, I do think Nico Minaru is really important. She provides a lot of key utility, including giving us a way to clean up Hood's otherwise detrimental body. Mockingbird at the top end of the curve could be something like Cull-Obsidian or Crossbone as another lower cost card with a big stat line for you to slam in the game. Our next Gilgamesh core and the last blue Marvel show we're going to look at today is a Thanos Spectrum deck. Thanos got reworked with a number of his stones in our patch this week, including gaining an additional ongoing stone that works fantastically with Spectrum. This deck list also excellent at filling the board up, and a lot of them are 1 energy cards, so Khazar and Blue Marvel both work to make Gilgamesh quite large. Our recently reworked Captain America also synergizes well with all of our ongoing effects, while also providing stat bonuses that can make Gilgamesh even larger. As far as series substitutions go for the higher series cards in this deck, obviously Thanos is not replaceable. He's core to what is going on here, but I think pretty much everything else is substitutable for other ongoing effects or cheap cards that you enjoy. Kyria can turn to something like Armor or Cosmo, and Nico Minoru, while providing good utility here, isn't nearly as necessary as she is in the previous Patriot deck that we looked at, can sub out for some other cheap 1 or 2 energy ongoing card that you enjoy. The remaining Gilgamesh decks that I've been working on are where we're going to start to color outside the lines a little bit, starting off by fitting him into the Angela Destroy deck that I've been fond of in the past. This deck list has a few organic ways to power up Gilgamesh, with Nico Minoru's couple of modes, Angela, as well as Carnage, with the big kind of flourish that we look to set up for the card being obviously teeing up a Nova with either Carnage or Killmonger to provide buffs across our entire board that everything, including 3 copies of Mysterio, can hold quite nicely for Gilgamesh to slam down with clean value on the last turn of the game. One thing that I think is important for a lot of Gilgamesh decks to do that this deck does well is something like the Demon provided by the Hood, or even an incredibly discounted Mockingbird, play really nicely with Gilgamesh on the last turn of the game to provide us a 5+1 to close things out with. This deck list is a lot less linear than a lot of the other Gilgamesh decks that are running around, since we have a lot of interactive bits like Red Guardian, and Killmonger not only serves to enable our own game plan, but it gives a powerful blowout counterplay against other Gilgamesh decks that are likely to be running around. As far as higher series substitutions go in this deck, I do think Mockingbird is pretty important, as her alongside Gilgamesh are your primary ways to put bigger numbers into play to be competitive. That being said, Red Guardian and Nocturne I think are definitely replaceable with other 3 energy tech cards that provide you cube equity in different matchups. Things like Mobius, Luke Cage, even stuff like Polaris or Gladiator can be very reasonable replacements at 3 energy that you can play out proactively on the 3rd and 4th turn of the game. The last Gilgamesh deck I did work on is probably the most ambitious of the bunch, and that is Gilgamesh Surfer. This looks to leverage a similar idea to the Angela Destroy deck in that Nova plus Killmonger lets you get buffs across your board to get Gilgamesh nice and large. The really kind of ambitious plan that this deck looks to execute is that if we play 2 cards into Hope Summers Path on the 5th turn of the game, that'll give us 8 energy on turn 6, letting us Silver Surfer and Gilgamesh together to not only pump up our board that's gone wide with 3 energy cards, but also go extra big in another path with Gilgamesh. I think this deck list has the most cube equity potential out of everything that I've looked at today, since I think its output range is going to be very unpredictable for the people that you're playing into. As far as higher series substitutions go for this deck, I think Hope Summers and likely Sebastian Shaw are not optional. Hope's going to let you get that big flourish that I just talked about, and Sebastian Shaw is just unmatched in the amount of stats that he provides in these Surfer shells. Red Guardian's definitely very replaceable with any other 3 energy tech card of your choosing. Something like Mobius or Polaris are great candidates to swap him out for if he's missing in your Marvel Snap collection. We really need to see some of these decks in action so you can see how I execute them and play through some of their lines. Be sure to peek at my secondary YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jeff Hoagland, where I do all my live streaming on this platform as well for the cuts up there of the best performing decks from this group. I'd love feedback on how you feel about this particular style of video on this channel. Kind of a quick hit summary at the start, and then reviewing a variety of deck lists that Gilgamesh has been feeling good in so far. I'd love to hear about that in the comments down below, as well as what Gilgamesh deck lists you've been enjoying as we explore this new season pass card in our latest season of the game.